Hey, what's up, everyone? My name's Zack Olinger. In this podcast series, I talk about relationships. Now, I know, as a man, you may not want to talk about relationships, or you may even tell me that the relationship that you're in is already pretty good. But I'm going to invite you to consider this. Could you be a little bit more fulfilled in the relationship that you have? I would like to have you consider that there may be other ways to kind of see the conflicts that are truly just unnecessary that we all experience in a different light. And if you're open to receiving or just giving me a little bit of your time, then I look forward to my guests and I inspiring you to become a man that can have more freedom, less conflict, and more pleasure in their relationships. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining me on another episode of the Real Zack Olinger. Today, my guest is Celia Kibler, and she is a best-selling author and a family empowerment coach and founder of Pumped Up Parenting and Fun Fit Family Fitness. And today she's going to talk to us about her relationship with her children. And she's also on a mission, just want to mention this too, because I found this awesome, to stop a million parents from yelling at their kids. And she's got a book, the Raising Happy Toddlers. So Celia, I really appreciate you being a guest. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Zack, for having me. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. So I think this is, something that we can all, well, I should say parents anyway, all of us that are parents can definitely relate to challenges and conflicts with our children, either being triggered by them or yelling at them for sure. I've definitely done my share of that. Not necessarily our proudest moments, but it does happen. Wherever you would like to go and start off with that is great. I mean, I'm just curious how it all started for you, what you've learned, and like what you talk about around this topic, because it's as like I say, us as parents, those of us that are parents can always relate to this kind of thing.
Absolutely. It's, parenting is a hard journey. It's one we start out, we're all excited, we're having babies and we're going to make this family. And we have this like imaginative like thought of what our families and our children will be like. And then these babies come out, and very often we're like, where did this alien come from? Where is this my baby? What, calling to the mothership, what have you done with my child? Can we bring this child back? And a lot of it is because we really don't understand this child of ours completely. And very often we expect our child to respond to us like any other adult would. But the only problem is this is not any other adult. This is a child. And just a bit of brain information, the human brain doesn't fully develop until you're 25 years old. So imagine the brain of your child, when you're looking at them going, you look like you're playing with half a deck. They are playing with half a deck. They've got that brain full of emotion and all the self-regulation and the logic that we have, they don't have. And it is our job as parents to get it in there. So the first thing to tackle is really getting to know your child and starting to see the world through their eyes, not your eyes. So that's a big first step.
Yeah, that's very true. That's a good point about just always like be called back into that awareness of about like how long it does take for the brain to like fully develop, and then like what kids do and don't have access to as far as what faculties. As you were speaking, I was just thinking about like being the architect of like you said about us getting these pieces in there, like help constructing those pieces, or if you're a gardener, you could think about it like cultivating the growth of those whatever it is, whatever seeds you would like to plant. Yeah,
exactly. And it's exactly what you're doing. You're nurturing those seeds, and the seed you're planting is going to be the adult you're growing. That the tagline for my company, Pumped Up Parenting, is by no mistake. It's because we're raising adults, not children. They're already children. Our job is to raise a confident, self-secured, compassionate, kind, happy, fun, self-sufficient, grown up. That's our job, and everything we do affects everything they do. Everything you do or act or say, good or bad, you are giving your child permission to do. So it's really important to check yourself and be the person you want your kids to ultimately be. And yelling is so detrimental. We could get into all the things it causes for children if you would like to. I would be happy to.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, let's go ahead and go there, because I mean, I can think back, like I say, not to my proudest moments. So I mean, I'm always open to growing. It's why I do this podcast and why I do a lot of things that I do. So I would love to know more about like what to tell us what yelling actually does to children. So
So,
yeah.
so let me tell your listeners too that, first of all, in case they're curious, I am a mommy. I'm a mommy of 5 kids, 2 I gave birth to and 3 I gained through marriage. And I've been successfully parenting a blended family for over 25 years now. I'm the grandma to 9 children. So I've been teaching and coaching parents and kids for over 40 years. So I'm old and I have lots of experience. So I bring you a lot of wisdom. And a lot of people say, you can't parent a child like, our parents parented or our grandparents parented. And to a point, some of that is true, but the basic nurturing of a human being, the creating a well-mannered, confident, worthy feeling, person, someone who doesn't second guess themselves, doesn't feel worthless, that still holds true all the way from generation to generation. And the things we have nowadays is, we throw in technology, we throw in the web, there's all access to all this information that is not always great. That's a little extension of bonus fun stuff you get to do and control with your kids. But the yelling part, and my dad was a yeller. My parents were fabulous. We lived in a very happy home full of laughter and music and singing, except that my dad was physically and mentally abused as a child, and he brought the mental abuse into our home. He did not gratefully bring the physical abuse. He was able to control that, but he had very short temper, very short fuse. And like my mother used to say, it's kind of like we're walking on eggshells and you never know which one's going to crack that's going to set him off. But what it does to a child, and I imagine if your listeners were yelled at as children, they're going to start relating to what I'm going to say. They make you feel worthless. It makes you second guess everything you do. It makes you feel like nothing you do is right. It makes you have very low self-confidence, very low self-esteem. And children that are consistently yelled at and live in a kind of aggressive parenting environment, they don't grow up to hate their parents. They grow up to hate themselves. And that is huge. I pray you did not have children so that they grow up to hate themselves. We all have our dreams and aspirations for ourselves. We have them for our kids too. And you have to be intentional to get them to where, you hope they become. I don't know if that was good English, but
Yeah. No, that's totally true. Like, that just reminds, there's so much that this brings up or reminds me of, for sure. And one of the things that I guess I want to speak to in that regard is that a couple of things. One is like being intentional and being aware. Like, so what for you, I guess, like what how did that look like for you? It was like you were parenting and things of that nature. Like, what helped develop your awareness and like your how do I want to say, like, somebody may even ask, like, well, did you ever yell at your kids, or like what kind of, like, what got you on the journey to be like what you're doing now, I guess. And like, come to the awareness of the detriment of yelling at kids, and what's a different approach? Like, how do you not yell at your kids? Some people may ask.
Right. The very, very common thing when I ask parents why they yell at their kids, they give two answers. The most popular answer is, if I don't yell, they don't listen. The second most popular answer is, and this is from people that come from very abusive homes where yelling was the only way of communicating, they'll say they don't know any other way. And so when I had children, I am not a yeller. So what happened with me as a child and being yelled at by my dad was that I became a person that avoided all conflict. In fact, the reason my first marriage of 15 years split up, the father of my children, is because we never argued about anything. Nothing in 15 years. Can you imagine? We had one fight in 15 years. So if it was going to cause a conflict, I didn't bring it up. When we went through marriage counseling, I brought up things that bothered me 15 years prior and stayed with me for 15 years in defense of my husband at that time. You know, what was he going to say? It happened 15 years ago. You know, really. But it dwelled in me for 15 years, and it boiled and boiled. And, you know, I built that up, that resentment. But that was because I became this non-confrontational person. I became the peacemaker. And I'm sure many of the people listening can identify with being the one that had to keep the peace with everybody. You know what? My job is to just make everybody happy, which obviously is unrealistic because welcome to life when things don't always go your way. But, you know, so in raising my children, I am kind of a very calm person because of it. So I'm not a yeller. But let's face it, we're all human. We all have good days and bad days. We get irritable. We may yell. And that gives you the opportunity to, of course, apologize to your children, which gives them permission to learn how to apologize for things that happen that they did not intend to happen. And, you know, and then when I got remarried and 3 more children became part of my family, and my 2 children had to connect to their new 3 siblings, I had to find a way to do this so that everyone could get along, feel trusted, and feel respected. And a lot of what I did to make that blended marriage work is a lot of what I teach clients so that their family works, because it works for any family. And as I tested it, I discovered it does work for every family because it's a matter of building that trust and respect for each other.
Gotcha. Yeah. So there's principles at play then, like, yeah, it's a universal kind of a thing. So with yeah, sorry. I was just thinking about your marriage and not fighting for like 15 years and everything. That's a remarkable point, because I'm like, yeah, like conflict is, I mean, it's just a natural thing. I'm not saying it's like everywhere, but it will happen, right? Like, and so it's hard for me to envision not having a fight except for once in 15 years, you know, like that's
Crazy, right?
it's remarkable. Yeah. So with the children, then especially with a blended family like that too. So like you had your 2 kids and they kind of did. How old were they, I guess, like just so I can work with a timeline when you got your divorce from your husband, your
So
first husband?
my 2, my daughter's the oldest of the 5, the rest are boys, so she's the queen bee.
Okay.
And the oldest. So she was, when my first husband and I split up, she was, I have to add 5 and 6. What's that? 11? 11. So math was never my strong point.
I hear you.
And so it is hers, however. She was 11 and my son was 5.
Gotcha.
And when we introduced them to my 3 stepsons, they were 4, Lauren was 11, 10, and So it was like 4, 5, 8, 10, and 11. So I mean, I could have given birth to all these 5 children. They were like right in order with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, very gratefully, they got along when they first met each other. And honestly, with 5 children, if they didn't get along, I don't know whether this marriage would have taken place because well, you can spend, they're little. You're going to
Mm-hmm.
spend your whole life with kids they hate.
Right.
But a lot of it too was the relationship that my husband and I had with the 5 of them and
Mm-hmm.
the respect and the trust we brought to the table and the guidelines, the boundaries, the limits that I held firm in our home
Mm-hmm.
that regardless of who was coming and going, when you step foot through that door, you knew what was expected. We used our manners. We had that. I had to know where they were at all times when they were visiting friends. There were no cell phones back then. Well, there was big bag cell phones, which of
Mm-hmm.
course I had one of them, but it wasn't like kids had cell phones all the time. So I had to know whose house they were going to, what phone number, and these were enforced. When they got cars, we had rules about they had to pay, $100 in insurance. They had to pay gas. This applied to all of them. If they didn't do that for 3 months, the car got donated, and that happened to one of them. So they knew that when they entered into our home, there was unconditional love, fun and laughter, but there were chores and limits and boundaries that they had to follow in our home. We spoke respectfully. They came from a home with their mom where they didn't use their manners and they were yelled at and cussed at and called names. And, a lot of times on Friday after the last weekend, we'd start all over again. But they were quick to remember because they knew the culture that we had put forth in this home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can appreciate that. My ex-wife and I feel like we co-parent really well. We're always on the same page with the kids. We
Great.
are able to communicate well with each other. That all being said, we also have different, like you said, cultures in our home, and my kids have certain liberties at my ex's house that they don't have at mine, and vice versa. And yeah, the getting used to that, especially just in the beginning, is kind of a growth thing, but it does become like a nice ebb and flow where they just know like, hey, we're over at dad's house now, so we can't necessarily do or say these things like we are over at mom's house, and then we're over at mom's house, we can't do or be certain ways because it's just the difference. So I absolutely can relate to that. The culture I think is a great way to frame that.
And it's a
And
good thing because when they get older, I mean, realize as adults, we go into little different environments where the culture is there. You're going to behave a certain way. You're going to behave at work
mhm,
that you're not going to behave when you come home from work and you're hanging out with your buddies.
mhm,
So it's important to know that there are various environments in the world. You go to school and they get to the point where they're in different classes with different teachers. Expectations are different.
mhm,
So the key is really giving your children a realistic look at what life is like when they become independent and adults, and not feeling like, oh, I always have to make them happy because that's not reality.
mhm,
And you're setting them up for disaster.
right. Yeah. Yeah. So I guess the thing that comes up for me too is communicating that, like, that's the communication seems to be key for everything, right? You can't have expectations and not communicate them because then people don't know what you have expected. So, um, I guess, what did the communication look like for like you in the blended family? I'm assuming, like, I don't know, if did you sit them all down and kind of go over it, or is it just kind of something that naturally happened, like as like day-to-day stuff like went along? I'm just kind of curious about that, like if you had a certain
I
way of
do I
doing
do
that.
have a system that I teach clients and they definitely include family meetings.
Gotcha.
So I highly recommend all families, blended or not blended, do a weekly meeting where you sit down 15, 20 minutes, doesn't have to be like a 2-hour board meeting,
Hmm.
but just like you do in an a organizational situation in a business, you get on the same page. You have meetings during the week. You talk to the staff and maybe your employees or, each other, so that you all know what's on the agenda and where things are going and coming from. And so, same thing at your home. Sit down, talk about it. We sat down with the kids, all 5 of them. I sat down separately with mine. My husband sat down separately with his, and then we brought them together. And this is what we talked about. And we brainstormed ideas. And we were like, okay, so, we want to make sure that we're all, working well together, and we want to hear from all of you what you'd like to see in the home, what you'd like to do, what freedoms you would like to have for the older kids. Clearly the 4 and 5-year-olds, they're still, stuck with our decisions, but not always, because giving kids options at all ages is important. You don't want to control every aspect of their life because they become like a caged animal and they rebel.
Right.
And you don't want to be treated that way. So certainly don't treat your children that way. Give them opportunity to make choices when things are negotiable. Give them opportunity to chime in and talk their opinion and speak it respectfully. In our home, I always get parents asking me, well, my kids don't use their manners. And the first thing I ask a parent is, do you use your manners? And usually the response is, well, sometimes. I'm like, well, then your children will sometimes use their manners. I had a client and I asked them that we were going through manners, and she goes, well, we've been married so long, we don't use manners. My husband and I are going on 26 years. We say please, we say thank you. We use our manners when we talk to each other. We smile, we're kind, we're generous, we're compassionate, and that doesn't end. I don't care how old you are. When I'm old, and I'm old, but when I'm older, I'm still going to use your manners. It's and that's children will do what you do. Communication is broken down into basically a rough estimate is 60% nonverbal cues, 20% tone of voice, and 20% your words. So what you're saying and the way you're saying it is far more important than what you're actually saying. And that's what they're going to mimic. Teach your children to smile when they talk. Teach them to use manners, because that's what's really going to become in handy as you go. And teach your children to be kind to each other and offer them the same respect back. They don't have to respect you just because they're your parents. They respect you because you respect them. I'm a little passionate about this, so just cut me off.
No. You were saying everything I agree with, because I approach parenting with my kids, the same way. Like, and to go back, to even yelling at their at kids and things like that. I've definitely lost my cool, and I always think about my youngest one. I've yelled at my oldest one too, and I don't do it all the time, but it has happened. I can think of times that it's happened. And at the same time, after it happens, I don't just let it sit there. Like I definitely take that as an opportunity to go and like explain what was going on with me. And like, we talk it out. My youngest son loves to say that I give TED Talks because I'm a very verbose person. Even when I'm writing, if we're writing on messages and stuff like that, I'll send paragraphs and he'll be like, thanks for the Harry Potter novel, like, and, but I like to like go into depth of like, I don't like to just leave them hanging. I don't just like let that experience happen and then not like try to explain what was going on with me and let them know like where I'm at, and just to do a form of healing around it. Like I take it as an opportunity, and then I use it as the same opportunity to like become more aware of like what happened for me to respond that way, and how can I, choose to not do that like in the future. So the whole idea of like the respect, and my kids, like they're 15 and coming up on 13 here very soon, so like I've had enough time to practice that, to know that they definitely respect that. They know that that I'm treating them with a certain level of dignity and respect, and that like I understand that they're their own people, and that I've got my own flaws. It's about teaching compassion, and things of that nature. So yeah, all of that, everything you were talking about, I resonated with. So I'm going on about it too. So,
It's important. It's so important. Parents forget that very often parents forget that, you know what, you can make a mistake.
Mhm.
None of us are perfect. We're all human. And it's really good for your kids to recognize that you are human and that we can make mistakes and we can learn from them. And, children don't automatically know how to deal with their emotions. It's our job to teach them how to regulate them.
Mhm.
And when you do that with your kids, exactly what you did, Zach, you are helping them learn how to deal and regulate their own emotions and understand that, oh, sometimes your emotions get away from you, but you can look at them and try to logically think of other ways you could have reacted because they don't have that built into them. They have to learn it from us. And I always say if they don't learn how to deal with disappointment or they don't learn how to deal with emotions, that's what gets people going into all kinds of, narcotic abuse or substance abuse and have all kinds of uh, hardships with, feeling like failures because they don't know how to deal with that.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely with my youngest son, he's always been super self-critical, especially he's been competitive and he likes to play games. And so that's one thing that just the whole idea of modeling, like you said, like as it goes back to the idea of the manners and things like that, you sometimes use them and it's kind of like that just all of that makes me think of like if you don't use it you lose it kind of a thing. It's not any different than any other kind of muscle. Like it's something, if you want it, like you've always got to keep it in practice, you've got to keep it on the forefront there. So to bring that back around to like my son being self-critical about like when he loses a competition or something like that, or dies in a game or whatever, he can kind of get down on himself about it. And I was like, Milo, I was like, winning's easy. Everybody knows how to win. It feels good. I was like, but learning how to lose is a different thing altogether. Like, cause that's something that like, it doesn't feel good. And how do you choose to respond to that? Like, how are you going to handle that? And not, it's an opportunity it's a growth opportunity, right? Like
Absolutely.
it's not personal. It's not anything against you, right? And I mean, even at 13, like he's literally been like this ever since he could get his hands on anything that would be a game. And even now, it's still something that comes up. He's gotten better about it. But again, like it's not it wasn't something I had to just say once or model it once. This is like a multi-year thing. And so it's my hope for him that he'll get to the point where he's like, yeah, like, so it didn't work out the way I wanted it to. And he's able to like not take it on so personally, so.
Right. Because, like you say, it's all about growth. There is no success without things not turning out so great for us. We have to reevaluate. There's great products that we use every day that came because something didn't work out. Chocolate chip cookies. They were created by this woman who decided she would add chocolate and make a chocolate batter. Batter didn't make a batter, it made chocolate chips, and the rest is history, the most popular cookie on the planet. I mean, things that don't work out, everybody knows about the light bulb and Play-Doh and some Post-it notes. Those are all things that are incredible, uh, what am I, inventions that were not intended to be inventions. They were intended to be something else, and they did not work out. And look at Yippee. So glad we have these things.
Right.
So yeah, it's all an opportunity to learn and to, examine and go, okay, well, if I want a different outcome, what's a better path I could have taken?
Yeah, that's definitely true. So I guess I'm curious too, like with to talk about like the clients and the people that you work with. Is it of all different types of spectrums? Like you get people that have been parents for a while, or like who do you look to kind of work with like specifically? I'm just kind of curious, like what your clientele base kind of looks like, if you don't mind me asking. I'm just kind of
No,
curious.
I don't mind at all. I do work with all parents with children of all ages. I even work with grandparents,
Okay.
because some grandparents are raising their children.
It's true.
Uh, I am very popular in the world of toddlers because, of course, my book is Raising Happy Toddlers: How to Build Great Parenting Skills and Stop Yelling at your kids. But even that book, if you read like reviews on Amazon, there are people that have teenagers that use this book because the majority of the book, I wrote it like a manual. So whatever, because they always say kids don't come with a manual. So I thought I'd
Right.
write one. So, you can look up anything, and the majority of the book relates to any family of any age. I mean, clearly, hopefully, your 16-year-old is potty trained, but if they're not potty trained, there's a subject on that, and, there's things that do relate for the most part to young children. But the majority of it, talking back, what teenager doesn't talk back, what to
Right.
do about that, it's all the same. Consequences, we all need consequences. Adults need consequences. Good or bad, good thing, good choices have good consequences. Not so good choices have not so good consequences. So it's all relative to all ages. And I do work with children of all ages. I do work a lot with people of blended marriages because I've had one for so long. And so really any parent that's struggling, especially with the way they communicate, I work with. I am on a mission to stop 1 million parents from yelling at their kids. So I do offer free challenges and free workshops to stop yelling at your children and get you on the road to being calm. And usually by the first day in like a challenge, parents aren't yelling. And it's so important to just start being intentional and becoming a proactive parent instead of a reactive parent.
That's awesome. And so one of the things that I'm curious about that came up with that too is having a blended family. Like, what was one of the biggest challenges you had with mixing a family in like that? Because I mean, I assume shared custody was still or I guess I should ask, like, instead of assuming, was shared custody still a thing? Like with your current husband, the kids went off to his wife and then came back. Is that right? Because you kind of mentioned that
Yes.
before. Yeah.
So my stepsons, their mother lived fairly well, she still lives fairly close to us. She's 2 hours away. And I think back then she was an hour away. When I first left my husband, I lived in Maryland and he lived in Missouri. So my children at the age of 5 and 12 actually boarded a plane by themselves and flew to Missouri. And if you think that's not like a tough thing to send that little 5-year-old guy on an airplane all by himself, you just pray that that thing takes off and lands like it should. And so that was its own little issue, but they had to go see their dad. Plus, their dad had an alcohol problem. So when I was his wife, I didn't have to worry about that because I actually don't drink at all by choice. I don't like it. And so I was always there. I was always the designated driver. Sometimes I joke back that I feel like I was put on this earth to be a designated driver. But sending them off on their own, I had to trust that they were safe, and I had to teach them what it feels like if they didn't feel safe, which is a hard thing to teach a 5-year-old. But they had to know so that if, God forbid, they were in an unsafe situation, they could speak up respectfully, of course, and state that. And but it's there is shared custody. We always had shared custody because I always respected their dad. I mean, he is still a great guy. Unfortunately, he's a quadriplegic now due to the drinking, but he's remarried and, his wife is great. And, we have a pretty good relationship with all the kids that are involved. Same with my husband's ex. But the hardest thing for that is having these children that come from all these different parenting patterns. So, especially for my stepchildren, because my stepchildren, their mother's home was like almost opposite of my home. They were kind of like free range children. They could do whatever they wanted to do. So even when my oldest stepson came to live with us at 8th grade, and he stayed living with us into adulthood, I had to talk to them and say, okay, when you live here, it's a different ballgame. Just like on the weekends, you cannot just go out. You cannot just roam the streets. You have to, I'm going to hold you accountable to where you are and what you're doing. And, you have to agree to that before you move in, because that's how it's going to be. And the two that lived with us did, of course, agree. But same now for my husband, my ex and I, we did parent like you and your ex. We did parent a lot of similarities. But I remember when we were because I was living in Baltimore like I live now. His mother lived in Baltimore. He was from this area. We're both from this area. And I would take the kids to go visit his mother because I thought it was very important for them to keep that connection to her.
Mhm.
But when the divorce first happened, she used to badmouth me. And the kids would come home and they would tell me all the stuff that my mom said. And I called him immediately and I said, look, we don't do that between you and I. I certainly do not expect a relative to do that. And if that's the case, I don't need to take them there. You can take them there when you're in and you're visiting. And I said, so you need to take care of that, right? That was not my responsibility to take care of it. I wasn't bringing them back until he took care of it. And then he did, and it got resolved. But it's important to address things that come up that you don't agree with. You have no control over the home of that other parent. It's an important thing. You can agree to whatever, but once they're there, whatever goes on, goes on. You need to set up your children for success, regardless of where they are. What the environment is. They have to feel safe with themselves, and they have to be able to speak up respectfully when they don't feel that way.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and I feel like that's an important piece. And I know I've been doing that with my kids for quite a while, for as long as I can remember. I remember telling them that I was like, look, like I'm your dad. I was like, and I'm an authoritative figure. I was like, that doesn't mean I'm right all the time. I was like, I'm going to do things that you don't agree with. And I was like, I'm going to invite you to tell me when you see something or hear something, or I'm doing something that you don't agree with. It's okay to like bring that to my attention, And my youngest son, to his credit, has totally done that, I have a certain way that I can joke around with my oldest son because he seems to enjoy it, that my youngest son doesn't. It's a little bit maybe kind of a little rough, can be. And so my youngest son told me, he's like, I don't want you to do that, don't do that. And I was like, okay, all right, and that he was probably, I don't know, 9 at the time, when he did that. So for anybody listening that thinks that kids can't do this, when you model it for them or invite them or give them permission,
Right.
that they'll totally take advantage. And I'm always just so proud of him for the times that he's shown up that way. Cause I think back to when I was a kid, I'm not sure, just maybe it was how I was modeled, but I'm not sure I would have taken that invitation. I don't know, but I just think back to my younger self being like, I don't know if I would have said anything, because I feel like I was timid, but again, like that could just be the pattern I was shown, as a child that, I think in the house that I grew up in, it was just kind of like, well, the parents are the authority and what they say goes, and there's no invitation to challenge that,
Right. And, there are a lot of parents listening that go, oh, well, they're just going to talk back. But the difference between talking back and talking up is respect.
Mhm.
That's the total difference. If your children talk back, they're being disrespectful to you. And that, I don't believe you should allow it.
Mhm.
That's not when you're like, try that again. Or
Mhm.
you'll say, you know what, when you're ready to talk nicely, I'm going to go on with my life and please come because I want to hear what you have to say.
Mhm.
But it's all about respect. And you want your children to talk up. You don't want them to talk back, but you want them to speak up, because when they get older, and they become adults, you want them to say how they feel. You want them to speak their opinions. You don't want them to feel like, oh, well, I just have to listen to everything. Certainly not as a teenager. You don't want them to feel like, oh my gosh, I'll just go along with this this
Right.
group because they're pretty cool. No, you want them to know right from wrong and be able to say their, what they feel when they
Mhm.
feel it. Just has to be done respectfully.
Yeah. Yeah. I absolutely agree with that. 100%. Yeah. So it's, I always acknowledge that with my youngest son. I always acknowledge that he's done it, and I'm proud of him for doing it. So like I engender that. I promote that. My oldest son just hasn't really taken the opportunity. He's very, I don't know if he just hasn't felt the need. That's what it looks like to me. But my youngest son has totally taken me up on it. And so yeah, I'm always just proud of that, because it's exactly the same thing. Like as they get older and they're going to be out on their own, like, yeah, I want them to be comfortable in themselves, to know what's their truth, and
Exactly.
to be okay with that, and not abdicate or subjugate themselves to things that they feel aren't right, but that they're just going to do anyway, or be influenced by because they were never invited to stand up or speak what they felt was right for them.
Exactly.
And you're right, it comes down to a respectful thing, because that's how that communication was modeled to them from me to them. Like I was like, look, I was like, I'm not going to be right all the time, so you guys just tell me, just be, yeah, just speak it. You don't have to, like, I'm not throwing it at you, and you're not going to throw it at me. We
Right.
can have a conversation about this. Yeah.
And certainly in this world today, so many people are missing that point that you can actually talk about things that you may not agree with, and you can talk about it respectfully. And if you don't agree, you can go on with your life. You don't have to agree about everything. And that's the same in a family. If what they want, doesn't fit into really the plan, you can explain it, you can talk about it, you can listen to their valid points while they listen to your valid points, and you can come to a compromise or a conclusion. But, also if your kids have an idea and you're like, oh, you know what, I think that's a better idea, put it into action, because that not just shows them respect, that shows them that you value their opinion. And was certainly like at your kids' ages, when they're teenagers, if they don't feel valued, when you ask teenagers, why do you feel disconnected from your family? They're going to say, because no one listens to me. No one cares what I have to say. When you actually care about them and you show them that you respect their thoughts and opinions and value them, they'll stay connected. You won't have a whole lot of difficulty through teenager land, because they're going to come to you for help because they know they can. And that's what keeps them talking to you and keeping that communication open forever. My kids now they're all in their 30s. My oldest is 39. My youngest is, I don't know, 32, something like that. I lose count. But, they know now if they need me, I don't care if it's 2 a.m, I hop in that car and I go to them, and I don't care if it's 2.5 hours away. I've done it for them before. I do it for them again in a minute, because there is that respect and trust.
Yeah, I think that's an important piece too, is letting them, like, demonstrating it, showing them. Because I remember too, like with my youngest son, I was in Colorado. I was like 8 hours away, because I live in Kansas City. And we had a phone call, and he needed to go, like it was real quick, and I could just tell something was up, and I was like, I need to have a conversation with him. But this is the kind of conversation that you have over the phone, like it just, there's just sometimes where it's like, it's just not, so I ended up leaving the event that I was at, and driving back to Kansas City, and like having this one-on-one conversation with him. And I know that me being present for him is a big deal, like because there's change going on in my life, and I very well maybe a more distant, further away, relocating out of Kansas City. But I needed to demonstrate to him, to be like, look, like, I'll know, like, when you need me to be there, and you can even tell me that you need me to be there, and I'll be there. It doesn't matter where I'm at. I can come back and be present with you. So that wasn't even like my original intent. Like when I drove, I just wanted to have the conversation one-on-one with him. But when I got there, I realized, oh, like that's actually a really important piece for him to like connect with, is that like, I will show up, like, just if you give me a little bit of time, I'll be there. Like, it doesn't matter where I'm at.
You just proved it to them.
Yeah.
And they'll know it for the future, because they'll reflect back, well, when I had this trouble 10 years ago,
Hmm.
Dad drove halfway across the country to be with me.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what shows that unconditional love. And it doesn't mean that you always have to drop everything. I mean,
Right.
sometimes we can't, we're in the middle of something, or a lot of people are working at home, and
Hmm.
your child wants you, and you're in the middle of a call that you have to be on. But then you also say to your child, okay, honey, when I'm done, I will give you my undivided attention. But then you make sure you give that child that undivided attention as
Hmm.
soon as you're done,
Right.
so that they know that integrity is a huge part of parenting.
Yeah.
If you want to raise children with integrity, you must be a parent with integrity. And
Yep.
I'm like huge about that.
Yeah, no, that's a great piece as well, because I absolutely agree with that, because yeah, I've never yes, I I don't I mean, I'm just trying to think, like, yeah, integrity for me is just such a big thing that, like, I don't like speaking something that I don't follow through on. And I even called myself
Exactly.
out on something with this that was unrelated to my children the other day. I was like, look, like, I was totally out of integrity with this, but my core, like, really, it just doesn't sit well with me. It doesn't let me actually keep out of integrity for a super long time, because it's something that gnaws at me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm the same way. And that's how you get kids to know too. So many parents say, well, I don't know how to be consistent.
Mhm,
And you got to be consistent. And if you say something, you have to follow through something. Don't say it if
mhm.
you have no intention of doing it. Like people say to kids, they'll be at a party and they'll be like, well, if you guys don't straighten up, we're leaving. When the parent has no intention of leaving. Well, so clearly the kids are going to figure out, well, we can do whatever we want because
Right.
they're not leaving, you know? So don't say anything as a parent that you do not intend on following through for, because then the kids will know that doesn't matter what you say, it means nothing.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. Well, I may use that as a segue to wrap up here with you. I know you were talking earlier before that you've got back to school kind of a program about like bedtimes and screen times and things that would be right in line with this integrity piece about setting the boundaries and like not
Yes.
stating things that you're not going to follow through on. So I would love to give you an opportunity to talk about that and how people can find you and work with you and things of that nature.
Well, I appreciate it. And you can find me on pumpedupparenting.com. If you're in Facebook, I have a Facebook group, Pumped Up Parenting. I have a podcast, Pumped Up Parenting. So a lot of pumped up parenting going on. And I am doing a back to school sanity pack because very often the summertime kind of, you lose your way and you're like, how am I going to get these kids up in the morning? So in that sanity pack, we're going to include setting up routines and schedules, which are gold for children. I mean, they're gold for adults. Let's face it. We could all use some more routines and schedules, but they're really golden for children. It'll include screen time on your time. So how to really set up those limits and boundaries of screens, not according to them, but according to what you need and what is part of your schedule. And there's one, oh, sleep, my sleep training, because when we sleep better, we feel better and everything goes along much smoother. There's a lot less irritability. So my sleep training is actually good for you as well as your children. And I do address in that training a lot of the common sleep issues that children have and how to resolve them.
Awesome. Well, that sounds perfect. Yeah, I can definitely relate to that as well. Because, like, yeah, the sleep schedules will definitely change during the summertime, and then getting back on track. I personally like to start like a week or two before school starts to be like, look, we need to get reacclimated to like you said, the routine and like the time and like that kind of a thing. So that way, when school actually starts up, it's not this jumping into the cold water kind of a thing. Like, like, yeah, let's just get back in line. Yeah. To
Exactly.
this new routine.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well,
You'll all
that's
be much
awesome.
happier.
For sure. Well, thank you, Celia. I appreciate you being a guest and I loved our conversation. So thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Zach. Very grateful for you to have me on. I
Of course.
appreciate it.
Of course.
All right, that wraps up today's episode of The Real Zack Olinger. Thanks again for listening. If you happen to find this episode insightful or valuable, I invite you to pass it along to somebody else, because chances are, if you found it valuable, they will too. If you're on Instagram, you can find me at The Real Zack Olinger. Until next time, everybody. Thanks for listening.